The Building Brands podcast is dedicated to exploring the journeys of industry leaders who have successfully built a brand. Join me, Robert Royer, president of Building Brands Marketing, and an entrepreneur who has successfully scaled multiple brands as we dive deep into the strategies, challenges, and insights that have shaped the success of industry leaders and provide you with the resources you need to do the same. Building Brands Marketing is a full-service marketing agency specializing in crafting customized marketing strategies for service-based businesses with a creative powerhouse to drive real results. Welcome to the Building Brands Podcast. All right, welcome to the Building Brands Podcast. I'm excited today to welcome Drew, owner and attorney of Anchor Trust Management. Welcome, Drew.
Thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So,
Good.
real excited to speak with you today. I know you're in the probate space. You have a really interesting model that's really fascinating. And talking to you prior to today, explain to the audience a little bit about the model of combining the attorney and personal representative and how that works.
Sure. So, you're right. It is unique. I haven't found anybody else since I launched my practice in 2017 doing the same thing. But basically, I'm offering a real full service probate and trust administration practice. So I not only serve as the attorney of record for the fiduciary, whether it's the personal representative in the state or a trustee in a trust, but I also serve as that fiduciary. I serve as the personal representative in, I believe, every estate that I'm administering currently, and almost every trust that I'm administering currently. So by, combining those two roles, I'm really able to kind of streamline the process. Billing is much more simple, and because of the added securities of being a fiduciary, I can offer no out of pocket costs or fees to beneficiaries needing to get an estate probated.
Yeah, so I find that interesting because you've really taken that pain point for a lot of clients in the space and turned it to part of your value prop of eliminating the hourly billing. And my question is,
Right.
if this is kind of a result of more personal experience, a market observation, or a combination of both.
I mean, certainly both, right? Like, in working with individuals at at the firm I worked at before starting my own practice, working with individuals serving as personal representative, they're all in the same boat. They just lost somebody they care about. Uh, they've got a full-time job, and they've got a family or life at home that they're dealing with. So to throw on top of that the job of administering in a state is a lot of work. So watching my clients at the time, not be able to get to the banks, not be able to have time to worry about an accounting or deal with any of those things, the court doesn't like to wait. So if your client isn't doing what they're supposed to do, you'll get an order to show cause why the court shouldn't close your case. And we would get those in cases because people were busy and unable to do the work. Also, in helping my clients serve in that role, I obviously took a lot of their work on myself, which is what a lot of probate lawyers end up doing. They end up doing the accounting. They end up negotiating with the creditors on behalf of their client, and all of that is not work supposed to be done by the attorney. So it's all typically billed extra on top of what their normal fees are. So that just made it pretty easy to see how I can kind of streamline this whole thing by taking on the role that I'm essentially already doing for most of my clients. But if I can actually put it into effect, I can really make it easy on them to get the thing done.
Makes sense. So you really understood, hey, that an area of opportunity in the market, and then you were able to leverage that to reinforce your value prop. So from that, once you defined that value proposition, that marketplace positioning, what type of marketing strategies have you used to grow the firm over time?
I don't really do any traditional marketing. the main things that I did were uh, I spent time at the local bar association, going to their events, meeting other lawyers. Um, I've already I'd already built relationships with a lot of other lawyers in the community. Probate practice is kind of a small niche practice in and of itself, generally, so you get to know everybody. Um, and after a while of appearing on cases as not just the attorney, but as the personal representative, I
Hmm.
started interacting with the other attorneys in that regard because, they would represent beneficiaries in some of my estates. Um, or they would just note that they would file creditor claims. Some attorneys that work with air search companies would file claims in our estates and notice that I was the PR and the attorney and would tell me, hey, I've got a bunch of these cases, and we've got, a child or a retiree serving as the personal representative. They don't know what they're doing. They don't want to. Would you step into that role? And it was, sort of seamless from there. Just um, by being hyper focused on what I do, it makes it really easy for people to recognize when they can use me, when I can be a help. Um, so, and in pretty much every probate administration, there's a family dynamic. There's, usually trust issues between siblings or beneficiaries, what have you. And by stepping in and saying, "Look, I'm a lawyer. If I do something wrong, I can't be a lawyer anymore. I've done this particular job dozens of times. I'll do it. It'll be this very simple flat fee. The percentages we talked about. Florida law sets some percentages for reasonable fees for probate lawyers and personal representatives, and it's like a glorified realtor. It's 3% and 3%. Um, and people love that. They don't have to do any extra work, and they know exactly what they're going to pay.
That's interesting. So, is there anything you do intentionally, Drew, once that referral, comes across? Is there anything that you do intentionally to nurture that lead, such as educational opportunities or anything of that nature?
So, not I don't. I know I have a lot of lawyer friends that do personal injury, for example. Um, and I'm on all their mailing lists, so I get all the regular email follow-ups, touching base. Here's a new change in the law. Here's this, here's that. You know, these are people that I already know, like, and trust. And if I have somebody call me with a problem that I think they can solve, I'm going to be sending them that way. So I don't need the extra stuff. So I assume lots of people are in the same boat. They're busy. They don't want to deal with that kind of thing. So for me, it's just by being clear and focused and really hyper focused on this one niche within a niche practice area. Lawyers find out about me, they know about me, they'll send me business, and they're happy to send me business because they know two things. Number one, they know that if somebody calls me looking for an estate plan, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to send it to some estate planning lawyer who's referred me business. So I'm not going to be one-sided with these types of referrals. And on the other side, when lawyers refer me cases where they're involved, but their client or somebody involved has died, they're happy to involve me because they know, okay, well, if Drew is the personal representative of the estate, that's the person that's responsible for engaging the lawyer in a wrongful death case, for example. So they know that, well, if I send the case to Drew, he's certainly not going to fire me from the wrongful death suit.
Yeah.
But that happens all the time with family members involved. The lawyer says something they don't like, or for any number of reasons, they get convinced to go somewhere else, and they'll just drop the lawyer, and that lawyer's left, hopefully with a charging lien if they're lucky, and that's all they've got. But you know, I'm going to make sure they stay on the case as long as they're doing a good job, and if I work with them, they do a good job.
Yeah, I know in leading up to today and speaking to you previously, you really described it as this personal SWOT analysis that was performed to identify a
Mhm.
weakness in the market and create an opportunity from that. Let's take a step back to kind of the beginning of the conversation. Can you walk me through that exercise a little bit that helped you define that market niche?
Well, the firm that I worked at prior to launching my practice, did probate and trust administration, but also did estate planning, and also did immigration law, and also did pretty much anything that came through the door. And as the only associate, that meant I had to figure it out. It was passed from the principal attorney to me and said, "Here you go, Drew. Figure this out. Make some money off of it." Um, seeing seeing all these different types of people serving in this fiduciary role, which was a serious role. I mean, you can get in criminal trouble if you make mistakes as a fiduciary, depending on the type of mistake we're talking about. And then, as I mentioned, it's a lot of work. There's a lot to do. And seeing all of these people from all different walks of life, all, plenty of really smart professional people not be able to handle it made it really clear to me that this process, because these people have never done this job, and because they've also got their lives and their jobs and their grieving process to deal with at the same time, they're really not capable of doing this efficiently. And so I'm spending all my time chasing the client down. Hey, did you go to Bank of America? Hey, did you get that safety deposit box checked out like we talked about? Hey, did you mail this to the beneficiary like you were supposed to? All that stuff. I mean, it just seemed obvious as after doing it for I think it was about 2 years, I realized that, man, if there was a professional in this role only, all of these so many of these problems and issues would go away. I can't tell you how many times I would be dealing with family members emailing me, because it's another point of contention, is that people generally think that the lawyer for the personal representative is the estate lawyer and represents all of us. I get calls like that all the time. Our lawyer isn't responding to me. I say, okay, well, let me pull up the case. But you're not the personal representative, right? No, my sister is. Well, that's your sister's lawyer,
Yeah.
not your lawyer. So all these kinds of problems and conflicts are just ripe in these types of scenarios. But if you pull out that family member and replace it with a lawyer robot, basically, that doesn't know anybody and has no, feelings or history between anybody else, it just makes that part of the process even easier too.
Yeah, this is fascinating to me because it seems like a no-brainer, and it's amazing to me that there there's not a deeper market of firms that do it just the way you do, in terms of
Yeah.
positioning. What advice would you give someone trying to carve out a niche in a crowded market like law?
Well, there's really two things for me. I mean, you say crowded market. I mean, it's nothing but lawyers and realtors in Florida. So I certainly get the feeling. But
Yeah.
if you're focused, if you have one thing that you do really well, and you know the ins and outs of it, and you can call off, statutory citations on this particular issue, and case law on this particular issue, you're seen as an expert. And by staying hyper focused, it's easier for you to be that expert. And when people recognize that expertise, that's who they want to work with. I mean, it's really that simple. When you go to a lawyer's website and you look at practice areas, and it's 4 or 5 menus side by side of practice areas, but there's only 1 or 2 lawyers in the joint, that's the problem. That you don't do any of those things really, really well then, and in what people would perceive when they see that kind of thing. So staying hyper focused is really important. But also, even in a crowded market, people are still making money. So I have I've heard it called like an abundance mentality. There's always business to be had, and people that you might feel are your competitors, like if you're a lawyer looking to hang up your shingle, every lawyer in Florida is not your competition. Every lawyer in your county is not your competition. Your competition are lawyers that are in your immediate area who do exactly what you do and do it really well and have good notoriety. So if you're hyper focused and you do only one certain thing, there's going to be a ton of lawyers around you that don't do that one thing. And so the abundance mentality comes in like, well, I can happily send the business that comes my way that's sort of close. It's tangential to what I do, but not exactly what I do, you know, and this is easier said than done for sure, because I know, when I first started my practice, we were ready to just eat hot dogs until until the
Yeah,
retainers
you're
started to
trying to
come in.
survive. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So if somebody calls me and says, "Hey, I know you don't do uh, immigration, but I've got an EB-5 visa that I need help with, and these immigration lawyers want $20,000 to help with an EB-5 visa, and it's just a few forms. Would you help me out?" It's really easy to think like, man, that's a good paycheck. I can read, I can figure it out. I'm sure of it, but you're going to end up spending more time figuring it out and bumbling through it and potentially causing yourself a bunch of issues and heartache at the end of it. Whereas if you just have that opportunity that comes your way and recognize, this opportunity is a good opportunity, but it's a much better opportunity for somebody else. And you pass that along, you're not going to be forgotten by that person, because they're going to realize, oh, well, you probably could have done this. But you're focused on what you do. What do you do? And then they want to know. And then you build
Yeah.
a relationship that way. I have clients, or I have referral partners who do probates. That's one of their main practices, probates and estate planning. I send them simple probates all the time, because I only do, I'm a solo practitioner. I've got two paralegals and an assistant. So we only do larger estates that, can
Hmm.
justify the level that we offer, or level of services we offer, or complicated ones, or litigated ones. So I send the small ones to the estate planning lawyers who do probates all the time. And they conversely send me any probate that comes to them that's got like, well, we might be fighting. I don't know if we're going to fight. They said, nope, send it to Drew. Give it to Drew, because we'll get more back. And it's really beneficial to operate that way, I think, and you can be successful doing it.
Yeah, there's a couple of really interesting points that you make there. That hyper focused approach, it really creates less of a barrier in terms of competition, because everybody kind of knows their piece in there. Like, we have other agencies that we're um, partnered with. One second, sorry. We have other agencies that we're partnered with, so to speak, that we refer business back and forth because we work in different segments of the market. But you know one thing happened to me in the early days, because it's natural when you first start out to go, hey, I'm just trying to survive. I'm going to take things that I know I probably shouldn't, uh,
Yeah.
and just to try to survive, right? And one of the things that happened to me in the early days, which this gentleman, now looking back in hindsight, really was looking out for my best interest. I had clients that actually, or prospects, I should say, that helped me out. I pitched a big hospital, and it was a great pitch. I killed it. I really,
Yeah.
really was well equipped for the pitch from a knowledge standpoint. And we got to the end of it, and he was like, man, that's wonderful. Like, I look forward to this. This looks like a great partnership. And he's like, who's the team? And at the time, there was no one in the company but me. And I was
Yeah.
like, you're looking at him, and he goes, hey,
Oh,
you want a job? He goes, I will hire you in a heartbeat, but this is way too big for a, one person agency. And I was ready and eager to take it on, because I was going, hey, this could be my only client, and, or, one
right.
of my bread and butter clients. And he really saved me there. And he said, hey, look, I don't want to do this to you. You'll be completely inundated, and, bite off more than you can chew. And it was a learning moment, because of course it was an ideal client that I was not supposed to have a pitch with. Like, I think I was like my second month or third month in business.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and I was like, well, I'm really stuck on this. I believe in this concept. I want to stay here, but thanks for the job offer, so on and so forth, and then moved along about my
Right.
business. But it was a huge learning moment for me, because that individual obviously had been on the other side before, where he had been the one that bit off something more that he could chew, and saw how it, set back over time. And he had
Oh
enough
yeah.
respect to speak up and go, hey, this isn't what you want to do right now. And I think that that's a really, like, a critical step in the business sometime in that first year, or that first year or two, to understand when you're supposed to turn down opportunities, because it actually can set you back further. It's really easy to look at checks and look at numbers and go, man, it's hard to turn down that 20 grand deal, but the
Yeah.
reality is, I've had deals that were 20 grand deals in the beginning days that we spent 30 grand in labor to fulfill. and we ended up losing money over
Yeah.
time, you know, because it ended up being so much more exhaustive than we anticipated initially. And we just looked at the, you know, the project total. That's a great piece of advice, Drew. I am curious because you've really had a lot of success. You've carved out a niche. You're killing it. You know, you have a fascinating path to how you got there. Is there anything you would do differently if you had to do it all over again?
This was a hard question, man. Like you mentioned hindsight, right? And hindsight being what it is, it's very easy to say, well, I wouldn't have taken this case, I wouldn't have taken that
Oh
case,
yeah,
or
yeah,
I
of
would have
course.
taken this case, but I would have changed my engagement letter. You can't. I don't think there's any profit or value in looking at it that way. So for me, I just look at the lessons that I learned by the mistakes I made, and obviously I would have liked to learn them sooner. And the big ones are, what you just hit on, where you take on a job or a case, and you end up investing way more energy or money or labor than it's worth. And it's really tough as a lawyer to recognize those cases when you first sign them up. And so because of that, my engagement letters, quasi engagement letters, because as I said, I'm the personal representative and usually the trustee and the lawyer. So I'm really my own client. So I don't technically have very many clients. Mostly just have heirs and beneficiaries that I deal with. But I still draw up engagement letters that that reflect the scope of work, and what's going to be involved and what they can expect as far as fees and costs. So they have something they can refer to. Um, and over the years, that has changed a lot. And I've made sure that I put specific, you know, uh, milestones in my engagement letters. That if we reach this milestone or come across this particular issue, it will not be covered by this engagement, and it'll require additional billing or this or that, or whatever the case may be. Because you get these calls, everybody's super believable on the phone, and what they end up telling you might not be totally accurate, and before you know it, you're probating an estate with no upfront cost to the beneficiaries that's worth $8,000. You were expecting 800, but all the assets have pay on death beneficiaries or something like that. It happens, and it happens. A lot of my referral sources are attorneys they work for air search companies, and so they don't know anything about these estates. Somebody else, a neighbor or a friend, maybe filed a petition, said they have a house and we need to probate it, and that's how the
Yeah.
air search companies find the heirs, and then they put me in there, and then we search for assets, and we sometimes find nothing. Um, so that can happen. So it's trying to recognize the potential extra work, in the initial days, in the early days before you have any kind of a contract or agreement in place. It's making sure that you have protections for yourself in your contract or engagement letter or whatever it is, so that if the unforeseeable does happen, you need a way out or you need a way to get paid. You got to make sure that type of stuff is in there. Um, and those are all things that I would have done differently. Those are just lessons you learn as you go through. I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't know anybody doing this type of a practice, so I didn't have like a mentor or
Yeah.
anything for this practice area. I just kind of I had a bit of a mentor in the attorney at the last firm I worked at, who kind of put my feet to the fire by giving me cases and clients, but didn't teach me anything about the business operation. In fact, I learned a lot about the business operation by watching their mistakes, and seeing
Yeah.
what would come across, clients that wouldn't pay us, or cases that didn't have the value we thought they did.
Sometimes that's the best way to learn. I was in a similar
Yeah.
boat. You know, my first digital agency I ran, my boss was a 60 mid 60s, upper 60s ex print lady. She ran magazines forever. I worked for a media
Oh, okay.
entity. And so while she could teach me some about business structure, relationships, things like that, zero as far as digital marketing goes, you know? And
Yeah.
so I had to kind of teach myself some of that. And for me, I actually think that there was additional value in that, because shortly thereafter, I jumped to another agency with someone that could teach me. And long story short, didn't work out at all. That person was not somebody that I wanted to be in business with. And that's what prompted me to start building brands marketing. But the reason I say there was more value in that way is it caused me to look at some other people's mistakes, because there were some people I was surrounded by that were making major mistakes in the industry, and then go and do a lot of self-learning from very, very credentialed resources in areas along the web. Now the good thing is, in my space, there are lots of different courses and things of that nature, certifications, things like that you can take that don't involve, they're not as costly as law school, right? Anyway, that actually I found was a more valuable path for me. So it's interesting because everybody takes a different path, and in your case, it sounds like you carved your own path, and that probably was the best thing when it's all said and done, looking back in hindsight.
Without question. I mean, it's one of those things I say I wish I'd done it sooner. But ultimately the time was probably just right for me to leave when I did. I mean, we had a lot of mistakes in the operational side of the firm I was at. Lots of employee issues and things, and a lot of lip service being paid to the initial promises made when I got hired. Right. The reason I want to hire an associate attorney right now is the same reason that I thought my boss at the time wanted to hire an associate lawyer. If I hire an associate, they can take some of the easier clients. We can split the workload up a bit, and I can continue to grow. That was the promise made of the old firm, but that was not what happened. All the cases went to me, and he went on vacation. That's pretty much how it goes. I could see the allure. Don't get me wrong. I could see that allure. But when there's no upside for the associate, then that allure fades very quickly. So yeah,
not only that, you're at a point, I can tell just by talking with you, you want to grow professionally, and you want to continue to become even better, even though you are really, knowledgeable and skilled in your field right now. And that involves being able to pass off some of that easier to pass off work, and then challenging yourself. That's the only way. Doing the easy things continuously aren't going to be the things that grow your skill set professionally.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I could maintain the status quo and, make good money, but ultimately, one of the reasons that this simplified kind of practice area and focused practice area, the reason I wanted to develop it in the first place, because I knew that it was also replicatable. I could very easily teach probate administration to an associate lawyer, to somebody who just graduated law school and passed the bar, and continue to build a practice with, first-time lawyers. And man, I think of my first-time lawyer job, it was I got a desk, I got 1,300 cases, and I got a stack this tall of papers on my desk every morning for me to stamp and sign. And that was it. I was a bar number and a signature for this large firm, and that's what most associate lawyers are looking at. But you could very easily learn this practice, and the more you do it, the more solid it becomes. And as long as you remain focused, you can build a base of knowledge pretty quickly. And if I have other lawyers that are able to do that, then there's no limit to the number of estates we could administer. I mean, just with me and my staff, we've got, I think, a couple hundred cases currently, all over the state of Florida. And all of them I'm serving as fiduciary, except for a handful of trust litigation cases. So having that extra lawyer there, doing something that you can learn pretty easily is a easy growth method for sure. So I'm looking forward to that, definitely.
And that's awesome. Well, best of luck in the next phase here, Drew. This has been a pleasure. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to be here.
If you enjoyed this today, like, share, and subscribe to the Building Brands podcast. Drew, it's been a pleasure. Look forward to continuing the conversation. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Robert. You take care.